What's up, folks? Mike from CMCC Builds here with character build number 3, the Mandalorian, Mando, Din Djarin, whatever you want to call him, one of the most interesting new characters of the Star Wars universe, and someone who actually works surprisingly well as a Dungeons & Dragons 5e character. Before we hop into the build, I want to reiterate what we're doing here. We're not creating optimized builds that feel like the character. We want to create the most accurate build possible and leave it to you to modify the build, if you so desire, into a less accurate but potentially more fun for you PC. I do my best to highlight some of those options to give some ideas about how to change things up for this purpose, but in the end, it's your call. I'm not presenting the right way to make these characters, just a right way to make these characters. So by all means, please modify as you see fit. And of course, have fun. With that preamble out of the way, let's jump into the build. For our race, we're going to take variant human. Custom lineage can work, but this build will be a bit mad multi-attribute dependent, so the +1 to 2 stats is more optimal for Din. For languages, go ahead and pick an appropriate one. We know that he can speak at least one additional language aside from Common, or Galactic Basic Standard as it's called in the Star Wars universe. Here he is communicating in Tusken, which is a combination of spoken and sign words. For our ability score increases, bump dexterity and intelligence. There isn't really flexibility here. We need both stats to be fairly solid to make this character work. The skill I'm going to recommend is Perception. Besides being likely the most important skill in the game, the Mandalorian is a bounty hunter and tracker. Being able to find clues from his surroundings is an important skill that he uses repeatedly. Like the Geralt build before this one, link above, we'll want to improve survival along with perception to shore up those tracking abilities, just not to the same degree. And for the feat, we'll want to take Sharpshooter. Mandalorians are known as great warriors, and Din is no exception. He can mix it up in melee with hand-to-hand, a knife, and eventually his Beskar staff, but his primary weapon is without a doubt the IB-94 blaster pistol. At its heart, the show, The Mandalorian, is a western with sci-fi and fantasy elements. And for this reason, the pistol is key to not only the character, but the essence of the show. Din is a great shot. We need Sharpshooter as early as possible. For the ability scores, we're going to take an 8 in Strength, 15 in Dexterity, 14 in Constitution, 15 in Intelligence, 10 Wisdom, and 8 Charisma. With our racial bumps, that brings Dex and Intelligence to 16. Standard caveat here, we're not trying to mimic Din's actual physical and mental abilities. This part of the build is always going to be about game mechanics and what we need to excel in specific areas, along with meeting multi-class requirements. And on that note, for our starting class, we're going to take Fighter. Starting here gives us proficiency with martial weapons, which we need, and heavy armor, which, spoiler alert, we won't actually use, but I feel all Mandalorians should be able to wear heavy armor if they want to. And Fighter lets us do just that. With our 2 starting proficiencies, I'm going to recommend Survival and Insight to round out the tracking bounty hunter skills. We'll add to those skills in a bit. For our fighting style, you'll definitely want to take Archery. Arguably the best fighting style, and when paired with Sharpshooter, which we have right from level 1, it makes for an excellent range fighter. We also get Second Wind, which gives a little HP boost as a bonus action heal. Moving on to background. Urban Bounty Hunter seems like the obvious choice, but I don't really feel like the proficiencies meet our needs here, so I'll recommend creating a custom background and using the Urban Bounty Hunter's background feature, Ear to the Ground, instead. Taking 2 skills and 2 tools will give us some good options. Starting with tools, getting proficiency with vehicles, sea and air, along with Navigator's tools is spot on for the character. Flying the Razor's Crest and navigating interstellar travel is a day-to-day activity for Djarin. For the 2 proficiencies, I don't think there is anything here that makes or breaks the build, but I'll go with Stealth because of this. And Acrobatics, because some of those fights and landings can get a bit dicey. I'm not going to go over the starting equipment, but a few things you'll need as soon as possible. A hand crossbow. If you've watched the Luke build here, you know what we're going to do with this. You'll want a dagger to represent your vibro knife, and eventually you'll want half-plate armor. I thought long and hard about whether Din wears heavy or medium armor. For me, it boils down to 2 main considerations. Most importantly, this is a dex-based build, and we've dumped strength, so going the heavy armor route doesn't make a ton of sense. And secondly, Din's full suit of Beskar armor consists of a helmet, plated vest, 2 pauldrons, 2 vambraces, 2 gauntlets, 2 greaves, and 2 boots. Now, D&D half-plate consists of shaped metal plates that cover most of the wearer's body. It does not include leg protection beyond the simple greaves that are attached with leather straps. That's about as close as we're going to get. Now, Mandalorians wear Beskar armor, so we'll need to figure out a way to replicate that here. More on that later. At levels 2 to 3, we're going to multi-class right away into Artificer. Probably no surprise there. We get magical tinkering, mostly a ribbon feature, nothing great for us. If you have any interesting ways to make this work for Mando, let me know in the comments. Love to hear from you. For proficiencies, we get 2 tool proficiencies, Thieves' Tools and Tinker's Tools. Both are useful for our purposes, so pick up those tools when you get a chance. Don't forget they might look a bit different than most Thieves' Tools you're used to seeing. We also get spellcasting, and remember that Mandalorians aren't magic like Jedi, so flavor your spells with a technological flair. More on the specifics in a bit. And at level 2 Artificer, we get infusions. We can imbue mundane items with magical properties. At this point, we have 4 known and can use 2. Our first infusion is a no-brainer. We're going to go with Repeating Shot on our hand crossbow. It gives us a +1 to attack and damage rolls, ignores the loading property, which saves us from needing the crossbow expert feat, which is a huge perk for this build, and it requires no ammo as the weapon can now create its own. This is our IB-94 blaster pistol and our primary weapon. We'll also want to replicate a magic item to create Goggles of Night for dark vision. Din's helmet allows him to see heat signatures, presumably in the infrared spectrum, so this is a close proxy for that. To replicate the vibroblade, we'll use the enhanced weapon infusion to give our dagger a +1 to attack and damage rolls. That bumps to a +2 at Artificer 10 if we ever get there. And as for the Beskar armor, we have some options. Beskar, or Mandalorian armor, is considered to be the toughest metal in the galaxy. It can withstand direct blaster hits and lightsaber strikes. In Dungeons & Dragons, the strongest metal known is adamantine, a non-magical substance that when turned into armor makes it magical. At least according to Jeremy Crawford. I have no idea how that works or makes sense, but that's the claim. Which is important actually because artificers cannot infuse magic items, so that does affect us. So in terms of descriptions, adamantine is perfect. But the actual mechanics of the armor simply stops a critical hit from occurring. No plus to armor class, it doesn't protect the wearer from being hit any more than normal armor. It just turns a crit into a normal hit. And that's not so great for what we want. So here I'll recommend enhanced defense to infuse the half plate and make it a stronger suit of armor. Ideally something like a +3 adamantine half plate armor would be the best, but I don't believe that even exists, so you'd have to homebrew something there. For now, get the best magic armor you can find, and for us that's this +1 half plate. Now since we can only use 2 infusions at a time, which do I recommend using? The enhanced defense and repeating shot, for sure. Your blaster and armor are the 2 most important items right now. For our spells, we get 2 cantrips and 2 first level spells. We need to be careful with the spells we take because there are quite a few cantrips that we want, and whether or not a spell is an artificer spell will eventually matter to our damage output. The cantrips we want are Thorn Whip, which works really well for a Mandalorian whipcord thrower. Din uses it to pull people towards him, both for people trying to escape or even mid-combat as a battle tactic. He also uses it for damage purposes, and Thorn Whip can do both, so again, we have a near perfect fit here. Then we'll want to take Shocking Grasp to represent the electrocution function of the Ambin Phase Pulse Blaster, or Ambin Sniper Rifle. Now's as good a time as any to talk about this weapon. Din carries this Disruptor Rifle right from Episode 1 and uses it throughout the show, so we better find a good answer for this weapon. I did a general Mandalorian guide nearly a year ago, and have been waiting for a good answer for this. There are some decent options, but nothing struck me as a solid fit, and then Fizzbands released in late October with this, the Topaz Annihilator. A musket-like weapon with a range of 100 to 300 feet that does 2d6 necrotic damage and reduces any creature it kills to dust. Oh, and it can cast a Disintegrate spell, DC 18, once per day. Yes please. I think I heard angels singing when I read this magic item. It's a legendary item and it's very powerful, so plead with your DM to make it happen. So you use Shocking Grasp or the Vibro Knife in melee. Don't forget that you get advantage on Shocking Grasp attack rolls if the creature is wearing metal armor, and it can't take reactions on a hit. Your hand crossbow blaster from range, and your sniper rifle from 100 feet and over. You could technically use the rifle less than 100 feet, but that wouldn't fit the character quite as well. For spells, there are no standouts here, so I'm going to recommend any spells that fit with a technological theme. Alarm, Grease, Snare works well as a variant of the Whipcord Thrower. I would also take Fairy Fire as a proxy for the Mandalorian helmet's ability to track heat signatures and even recent footprints. Fairy Fire makes it easier to see enemies and prevents them from benefiting from invisibility, so the similarities are there even if it's not a perfect match. At level 4, Artificer 3, we get our Artificer Specialist subclass, and this is perhaps the most difficult decision of this build. The 3 playable subclasses all fit to some degree, but some work better than others, so allow me to explain. Battlesmith could actually work for this build. Range Battlesmith builds have been optimized by many others and they do perform well. The big thing you get with Battlesmith is the ability to use magic weapons with intelligence instead of strength or dex. That would actually be huge for us. You also get Steel Defender. Even though Din has an absolute disdain for droids given his childhood trauma, he does spend significant time fighting side by side with the Hunter droid IG-11. There's a strong argument to be made for going this route, but I'm not going to. Then there is the Armorer. At the start of this build, truth be told, I thought for sure this is the way I was going. Blasters on your gauntlets that use intelligence, extra attack, heavy armor proficiency with no strength penalty, And you get a particular spell that I really want for one of Din's main weapons. But I'm not going this way either. I don't actually want to wear heavy armor. I don't need extra attack. In fact, it'll be wasted on this build. Spoiler. The gauntlets are nice, but I think we can do better. The artillerist works really well for what we need. We're primarily here for the Eldritch Cannon, a flamethrower that does 2d8 damage in a 15-foot cone as a bonus action, and we can use it for an hour. Make the cannon tiny and work with your DM to see if you can attach it to your van braces. The rule states that the tiny one can be held in one hand, not that it must be held in your hand. The free hand is helpful for using two-handed sniper rifles, casting spells, or having a blaster and a knife in each hand, so try to get that cannon on your van braces or on your shoulder at worst. The cannon has an AC and hit points that scale with Artificer level, so it can be destroyed. We'll eventually want to get the Mending spell to repair the cannon, but if it's destroyed, you can create another one with the use of a spell slot. We also get proficiency with Woodcarver's tools and the Artillerist spells. At this level, we get Shield and Thunderwave. For the Shield spell, there are times when Din is outnumbered, so he shells up, kind of like a boxer against the ropes, and just lets his armor do the heavy lifting. Use the Shield spell for this. You're going into a defensive position, trying to cover as much of your body as possible with your Beskar and hoping for the best. Thunderwave can be flavored as dropping a small thermal detonator right in front of you and using your Beskar armor to prevent any significant damage to us. Bit of a stretch, but I think it's close enough to be usable. Now at level 4, we're going to use our action to cast a spell, or more likely fire off a sharpshooter shot with our repeating hand crossbow, then rush into battle to try to hit 2+ enemies with our flamethrower. It should be noted that with the archery fighting style and the repeating shots +1, sharpshooter's +10 damage feature only comes with a -2 penalty. That means that we're not turning off sharpshooter until armor class 21, or if you have advantage, likely from fairy fire, until armor class 22. So it's safe to say at level 4, you'll have sharpshooter on pretty much every time. At level 5, we're going back to fighter. Level 2 gets us action surge. At fighter 3, level 6, we get our martial archetype. I'd love to go battle master here. It fits thematically and several of the maneuvers work well for our needs, but unfortunately I think Eldritch Knight gives us some really important things that we can't miss out on. We get weapon bond, which is a cool ability that just doesn't do much for us. We're not summoning any weapons into our hand. Mandalorians are not Jedi. But we do get spells, and spells that we need. For our cantrips, we'll take Light, which does a good job of mimicking the light on Din's helm. We have Goggles of Night, but we rarely use them since our infusions are tied up with our crossbow and armor. For those times when you get caught in darkness and don't have time to switch up the infusions, Light can be helpful. We'll also want Mending to repair our cannon. Mando can do minor repairs on his own gear and the Razor's Crest, so it fits thematically. We get 3 leveled spells, and the first one we definitely want is Magic Missile. 3 glowing darts, or more if you upcast a spell that auto hit their targets with force damage. If that's not a perfect match for Whistling Birds, then I don't know what is. This might be my favorite 1-to-1 match of any ability in any of my builds so far. This is exactly how I always envision Magic Missile to look like, and mechanically it's as close as we're going to get. So getting access to this spell was essential for the build. For the second spell, let's take Absorb Elements. Beskar armor can withstand pretty much anything, including a laser blast from a light cruiser that literally incinerated the entire Razor's Crest but left the Beskar staff unscathed. We're going to take any spells or abilities that help strengthen our defense as a way to emulate Beskar's durability. Absorb Elements works for that purpose by reducing the damage by half. We know that nearby explosions can still do serious damage to Din, as we saw in episode 8 when he nearly died, but the Beskar, or in our case Absorb Elements, can stop enough of the damage to keep you alive. And that's what we want. Alive is good. The third spell we take doesn't have to be from either the Evocation or Abjuration schools of magic like the previous two. Here, most people take Find Familiar with their Eldritch Knights. Honestly, if you want to flavor Grogu as some type of creature from a distant place, be it Fey or otherwise, that is quite fragile yet has some combat applicability, Grogu with his Jedi powers and you're familiar with the help action, I wouldn't argue too much with you. It's a bit of a stretch for me though, so here I'm going to recommend we take Fog Cloud for the smoke grenade that the Mandalorians, including Din, use. It's a find utility or combat spell that becomes great if you have PCs with Blind Sight or the Alert feat. At level 7, Fighter 4, we get our first ASIR feat. I'm going to recommend going with Gunner here. Our bonus action is accounted for, so Crossbow Expert is out, but we still want that feature where we can make ranged attacks in melee without disadvantage, and Gunner provides that, along with a +1 to Dex, which we also need. The proficiency in firearms we already have, so that does nothing, but ignoring the loading property of firearms could be useful if your DM incorporates guns into the campaign. That would also free up an infusion, as you could drop the repeating shot infusion, but I'm going to assume no firearms. We get an additional spell at this level, and there are not really any great ones that we can take raw, rules as written. So I'm going to suggest, and this is going to sound weird, hang in there, Burning Hands. Yes, I know we have a flamethrower, but Din has a flamethrower on both of his van braces, and now so do we. Mechanically, if there's that golden opportunity where there are 3 or 4 weaker enemies right in front of you that you can hit with your flamethrower, you may want to upcast because we have second level spell slots, Burning Hands, to hit them once with fire for 46 and then use your bonus action to finish the job with another 2d8. Let's assume there are 3 CR2 creatures with CR2 average dex saves right in front of you. Using this method, you can deliver 54 points of damage in one turn. If there is a fourth, that jumps to 72 damage. It's thematic and it may actually work once in a blue moon. So, yeah. Level 8, Fighter Level 5, we get extra attack. Finally. I know this seems to get delayed in every build, but I try to make sure we have ways to mitigate the hardships from levels 5 to extra attack, whenever that is, so that we don't lag behind other potentially optimized builds. In this case, we have Sharpshooter that is turned on almost all the time until AC of 22 or 23 with advantage, and our Flamethrower that should be hitting 2 or more enemies for 2d8 each turn with a save DC of 14. Using an AC of 15 and the average dex save for a CR7 creature, if we hit only 2 creatures with our flamethrower and assume advantage from Fairy Fire, we're totaling 25.3 damage at level 7, which is not bad at all. And at level 8, once we get extra attack, that jumps to 37.1 damage per round. Really quite good. And we haven't even touched the Anvin Sniper Rifle. Level 9, we're sticking with Fighter to get another ASIR feat. Here we're going to take Piercer, so we can round out our dex at 18. That gives us bonuses to attack, damage, initiative, but unfortunately not AC. We also get to re-roll one of our damage dice or add a damage die to a critical hit. Doesn't do much on average, but every little bit counts. And on those occasions when you turn a 1 into a 6, it feels so good. With bumps to dex and proficiency at this level, we're not turning off Sharpshooter until AC 24 or 25 with advantage. Level 10, let's go back to Artificer for a while. This gives us an ASI or feat. Here we should max out our dexterity. Bumping intelligence is also an option, but if you run the numbers, that provides an extra spell preparation, which you don't really need, and about 1/2 of a point of damage per round split amongst 2 enemies from our flamethrower. Increasing dex improves our initiative along with attack and damage rolls, and it ends up giving us just under an additional 3 points of damage per round. We do get another spell preparation at this level, so let's take Cure Wounds as a medkit proxy. If you did go the familiar route, you could upcast this through the familiar to mimic Grogu's fantastic healing abilities, which is kind of cool. At Artificer 5, level 11, we get second level Artificer spells. I would unprepare basically all Artificer level 1 spells besides Fairy Fire. There are a bunch of situational level 2 spells that we want here. Dark Vision and See Invisibility both work great to replicate Mandalorian Thermal Vision. Pyrotechnics is a decent spell that does a good job of providing us with both smoke grenades and flash charges. There are plenty of good uses for these in and out of combat. And finally, we're going to take Levitate. Have we trained in the way of the Rising Phoenix? Yes, but we slept through the how to move part of the class. Until we can actually fly, this will have to do. And with Din's initial jetpack flights being a bit rocky, I think we can make this work through some fun RP. And we can also levitate someone else. At this level, we also get Arcane Firearm, which gives us an additional D8 to one of our damage rolls from an Artificer spell cast through the firearm. This would have been amazing for Magic Missile, but unfortunately it's not an Artificer spell. However, we do have several spells that we'll definitely want to cast through this, especially any area of effect spells like Shatter. Although we never see him actually use it, Din does have a Relby V10 micro grenade launcher on the Razor's Crest that we see on the show. I would flavor any Shatter spells as that grenade launcher. At this level, we have 2 level 3 spell slots, so we can fire off a grenade that does 5d8 damage in a 10-foot radius. Shocking Grasp, Thorn Whip, Scorching Ray are all spells that benefit from the extra d8. Since they're not AoE spells, the bonus isn't quite as dramatic as it is for Shatter or Thunderwave. And the damage output won't be as high as your hand crossbow blaster damage, so you won't be using those spells much. But it's still important to remember for those occasions where you do find uses for them. Artificer 6, for us, level 12 is another big level for Artificers. We get 2 more infusions known, a 3rd infused item slot, an additional preparation, and tool expertise. Expertise in our tools is nice, but not extraordinary. For our 2 infusions, let's take Spell Refueling Ring for some additional spell slots / ammo. And we can go with Radiant Weapon here for another Flashbang blinded effect. You can add it to your dagger, but I would suggest using the 3rd infused item for the Refueling Ring. With the additional preparation, I'd go with Heat Metal. If we're burning everything with our flamethrower, there's some RP synergy there where you can flamethrower someone, then cast Heat Metal through your firearm to do 3d8 per round while continuing to blast them with the flamethrower. This is also a good option if you have disadvantage on your attacks for some reason, or the big bad has a sky-high AC. You want to find other ways to deal damage. Whistling Birds, grenades, and burning them with Heat Metal are all good options depending on the enemy. Artificer 7, level 13, we get Flash of Genius, a great ability that allows us to add our intelligence modifier to ability checks or saving throws, intelligence bonus times per day. Mandalorian armor protects you and others. Use this whenever you need to. Level 14, Artificer 8, we get another spell preparation, so let's take Cure Wounds again. We got some more medkits, all right. We also get an ASIR feat. You could bump intelligence here, but again, I don't think it's worth it for this build, despite relying so heavily on the flamethrower. If you find that your DM throws a ton of creatures your way with high dex saves, then you might want to bump intelligence here. I'm going with the alert feat. When you are the main character of a Western and do things like this, and this, you need to be the fastest gun in the West, the galaxy, I don't know. But you need a high initiative, and this gives us that. We also can't be surprised while conscious. Also great, and more importantly, fitting. No one gets the jump on the Mandalorian, not even a Jedi. Unless you trick them, sneaky buggers. And finally, other creatures don't gain advantage on attack rolls as a result of being unseen. This is actually pretty huge. Now those smoke grenades from Fog Cloud or Pyrotechnics result in us having advantage on all enemies in the smoke. RP it as you can see them, but they can't see you. Staying with Artificer at level 15, we're in Artificer 9, another big level. We get Explosive Cannon, 3rd level Artificer spells, and a 4th level spell slot. Unprepare, Cure Wounds, and Levitate, that allows us to take Fly. We are now fully up to speed in the Way of the Rising Phoenix. We can fly for 10 minutes until we run out of fuel or lose concentration. RP that as damage to the jetpack that can be repaired later via the use of another 3rd level spell slot when you cast Fly again. We can also take Glyph of Warding to give us a sticky bomb to use, place that on a wall and watch it explode when it's triggered. We also get Fireball and Wind Wall as our artillerist spells at this level. Fireball is a perfect spell for the missile launcher Mandalorians often have on their jetpacks, like Bo-Katan or Boba Fett. Din, however, doesn't have this. At least he never used it, but technically did have Boba Fett's armor in his possession for a while. You can make this work with some creativity. Wind Wall, I don't even know what to say about this. It does nothing for us. It's not good, and I don't even know why artillerists get the spell. If you know, tell me about it in the comments, please. A brief mention of a Chardalon Stride. This is kind of thematic for a Mandalorian with a jetpack. They'll often use the jetpack to speed across the floor or aid their melee attacks. So having shooting fire from your feet like the spell or your back like the jetpack is fairly thematic. If you like the spell, I wouldn't hesitate to pick it up. For me, Fly and Glyph are the more important spells at this level. The Explosive Cannon adds a D8 to our Flamethrower, which is now up to 3D8. So that brings us to 20 flat damage with our Flamethrower if we hit 2 CR15 creatures. Not bad for a bonus action. Our crossbow is doing another 26.25 against AC 15, or 34.4 damage with advantage. The explosive cannon can also explode on command and do the same 3d8 that it could do as a flamethrower, so I guess we have another grenade option if we so choose. Sure, whatever. Level 16, Artificer 10, and another big level for us. We get some very important things. 2 more infusions known, so now we're up to 8. Another infused item, which brings us to 4. We learn another cantrip, which we want, and magic item adept. This allows us to attune to a 4th magic item, something that we'll likely need, especially at this level. The second clause about crafting magic items isn't very important to the build. We get level 10 infusions, which means a big power bump to the magic items we can create, and the enhanced defense and enhanced weapon infusions bump to +2. We can change 1 infusion per level, so let's drop Radiant Weapon and take Eyes of the Eagle. These crystal lenses give advantage on perception checks and allow us to make out details of even extremely distant creatures and objects as small as 2 feet across. This is our range scope that Din uses to scout from a distance. It's perfect. We'll also take Cloak of Protection. Din has a cloak or a cape, and this allows us to bump our defense, which is essential. With this and the enhanced defense infusion, we now have a 20 AC and easy access to the shield spell. There are a few other good options. Helm of Awareness gives us advantage on initiative rolls, adding to that skill and fitting the Mandalorian helm's properties. Gauntlets of Ogre Strength will be a good option when we get the final weapon necessary to complete this build. More on that later. And of course, Wing Boots, our jetpack. Concentration-free flight. Although it's slower than the fly spell, and the boots run out of juice after 4 hours, that's actually a cool detail that makes it feel more like a piece of technology rather than magic. For our new spell preparation at this point, I'd probably take a Chardalon Stride. It's not a great spell, but it has some fun RP potential for the build. There are 2 cantrips that we need to complete this build. The one I'm going to suggest is Sword Burst. We don't really have any good on-hand weapons or abilities that represent the Vibro Knife, but this one works decently for what we need. If you're surrounded by enemies and don't want to use a spell slot, you can use Sword Burst, or for us, the Vibro Knife Burst, I guess, to hit the surrounding creatures for 46 plus 1d8 once we hit next level to each creature. Unfortunately, it's a cantrip, so they don't save for half, but 18.5 damage to 3+ creatures on a failed save is really good for a cantrip. At level 17, we're going back to Fighter for a 7th level. Here we get War Magic, which allows us to take an attack as a bonus action if we use our action to cast a cantrip. So in the aforementioned Sword Burst scenario, if we're surrounded by enemies and we Sword Burst with our Vibro Blade and kill them all, we can use our bonus action to find an enemy in the distance to attack. It won't happen often, but if it does, we have the option. We also get 2nd level EK spells, and we get to replace a spell we took earlier. Here we need to remove Fog Cloud or whatever spell you took at 3rd level that was not from the Evocation or Abjuration schools. We are now able to replace that spell with any 1st or 2nd level spell from the wizard's list. And right now, we're going to get our Dark Saber. We're going to take Shadow Blade. Now, whenever we're in melee and in dim light or darkness, we can bust out the Dark Saber and do an average of 38.8 points of damage per round, which is more than 9 points better than our crossbow blaster without advantage, and 1.5 points better if both the Shadow Blade and the crossbow have advantage. Assuming you have the spell slots, the only time you're not using your Shadow Blade is if you expect a very short battle where losing a bonus action flamethrower usage will be a big deal, or if you don't have advantage with the Shadow Blade and do with the crossbow. For the final spell, take whatever you like. There aren't really any good options, and who cares? We have a Dark Saber. At level 18, Fighter 8, we get another ASI or feat, and another spell known from any school of magic, which is great because there is nothing for us in the Evocation and Abjuration schools at this point. 2nd level wizard spells are pretty good, but not really at 18th level. Vortex Warp is a great spell that a lot of people are sleeping on right now. Misty Step is always useful, and Mirror Image may be the most effective 2nd level spell in tier 3 and 4. But none of those spells are Mandalorian abilities. I'm going to recommend taking either Blindness Deafness as another flashbang option, or even Floating Disc. Why Floating Disc? For our ASI or feat, I think we have 3 good options. We can bump Intelligence. Boring. We can take Martial Adept for 2 maneuvers, which will add to our fighting prowess. Something like Trip Attack or Menacing Attack are both effective and thematic. But I'm going to go with Medium Armor Master. It gives us another +1 to our AC. It removes the stealth penalty we've had this whole time, which doesn't really fit with this character. And if anyone is going to be an Armor Master, it's a Mandalorian. No. It's the Mandalorian. At level 19, we're going Artificer 11 for spell storing item. We can store a 1st or 2nd level Artificer spell, and we don't even need to prepare it. And it can be cast by anyone as many times as twice our intelligence modifier, so in our case 6 times. I would probably fill this up with Cure Wounds and hand those med kits to another party member that may need to heal themselves or can easily help fallen allies. At level 20, let's stick with Artificer for another ASI or feat. And finally, we're going to boost our intel and what? Nope. We're going to get Martial Adept to completely reinforce our martial capabilities. Menacing and Trip Attack, like I said, are solid options, but I'm going to take Bait and Switch because it's an awesome maneuver and it adds to our armor class, and Precision Attack because Mando just doesn't miss. And that, my friends, wait, we're missing something. The Beskar Staff. How do we get our hands on that? Well, you can change your ability scores to get a 13 in Wisdom and multi-class into Monk to allow us to use a Quarterstaff as a Monk weapon and use Dex instead of Strength for attack and damage rolls. We can also attack with our hands and feet to do some extra damage, which is thematic, but that just stretches us too thin. We have the Gauntlets of Ogre Strength, and we can wield a Magic Spear or Quarterstaff to good effect. Or we can get our hands on an all-purpose tool, which allows us to pick up any cantrip and cast it as an Artificer spell. So we can cast Shillelagh as an Artificer spell and use our Intelligence modifier instead of Wisdom for the staff. But let's be honest, with a Dark Saber, a Blaster, and a Flamethrower, it's unlikely we're ever going to use the staff. But if you come across an all-purpose tool, or an awesome Magic Spear / staff, or you want to spend an enhanced weapon and Ogre Gauntlet Infusion to make this work, you can. The option is there for you. And that, my friends, is Din Djarin.
Mando.
The Mandalorian.